At 5:12 a.m. local time in the Persian Gulf, the sea is nearly mirror still. A U.S. oil tanker valued at around $200 million moves steadily through the morning haze, its enormous hull gliding across dark blue water. From a distance, it seems almost frozen in place. Only the long white trail behind it hints at how fast it is really moving. On the bridge, everything feels ordinary. The navigation lights are fading as the sun slowly rises above the horizon. The officer on watch checks the course. Engine readings remain steady. Radar shows only scattered civilian traffic far in the distance. Nothing seems out of place, nothing suggests danger. Then the first alert cuts through the calm. A sharp electronic tone breaks the silence on the bridge. The radar warning receiver flashes red for an instant. No one reacts at first. Then the signal comes again, louder this time. The navigation officer leans toward the console. Contact, fast moving, bearing northwest. The radar operator narrows his eyes at the display. 2 contacts, low altitude, closing rapidly. At first, the radar returns are faint, nearly swallowed by sea clutter. But with each passing second, they become stronger, extremely fast, flying just above the surface. Outside on the bridge wing, the lookout lifts binoculars and scans the horizon. At first, there is nothing but haze, sunlight, and open water. Then, without warning, 2 dark shapes break through the clouds. Jets, fast, low, coming straight at the tanker. Inside the bridge, the mood changes at once. There is no shouting, no chaos, only focused silence. The captain steps forward, range 30 miles and closing. The 2 aircraft hold a precise formation. For a few moments, they are only silhouettes against the brightening sky. Then sunlight catches their wings. Iranian military aircraft most likely strike fighters equipped for a maritime attack. The jets descend even lower, skimming just above the surface of the Gulf. Heat trails shimmer behind them over the water. On the tanker's radar, the 2 contacts suddenly separate. One veers slightly left, the other moves right. A textbook attack profile. The radar warning receiver sounds again, louder and more urgent. Lock warning. The captain understands instantly. The ship is being painted for a strike. Missiles, sound the alarm. The emergency siren begins to echo across the vessel. Crew members on deck look up, confused. Some start moving, others freeze. But by then, the attack has already begun. At 20 miles out, the aircraft release their weapons. 2 anti-ship missiles drop from under the wings. For the briefest moment, they fall in silence. Then, their motors ignite. White fire bursts from the rear of each missile, and both surge forward with terrifying speed. From the bridge, they appear as thin white lines tearing across the sky. Missiles inbound! In that instant, time seems to shrink. 10 seconds. 8. 6. There is almost no time to respond. The first missile strikes the port side just above the waterline. The blast is devastating. A violent explosion rips through the steel hull. A huge fireball rolls across the cargo deck, sending flames high into the air. Shockwaves slam through the ship. On the bridge, windows burst. Crew members are thrown off balance. Debris crashes across the deck. Oil lines rupture almost immediately. Thick black smoke begins climbing into the sky. And then, before anyone can recover, the second missile arrives. 3 seconds later, it hits near midship. The detonation tears through internal compartments with overwhelming force. A second explosion erupts, even larger than the first. The tanker convulses under the impact. From miles away, it now resembles a burning mountain adrift at sea. Flames race across the deck. Fuel catches. Alarms scream throughout the vessel. Electrical systems flicker. Some fail altogether. Navigation displays go dark. Communications dissolve into static. The captain grabs the railing as the ship begins to lean slightly to port. Damage report. No answer comes back. Only shouts, the chaos of the crew, and the relentless roar of fire. Outside, the Iranian aircraft are already breaking away. Their job is done. The jets climb slightly as they accelerate back toward Iranian airspace. Behind them, the tanker continues to burn, a towering column of smoke rising thousands of feet into the sky. From the attacker's point of view, the operation is over. 2 missiles, 2 direct impacts, but one critical detail escaped them. High above the Persian Gulf, about 50 miles away, another aircraft is watching everything unfold. A U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft. Its sensors suddenly register an intense infrared flare. Missile launch signature. Seconds later, another reading confirms the blast itself. The crew immediately slews their cameras toward the source. On the screen, a grim picture comes into focus. A burning oil tanker wrapped in smoke and flame, and 2 aircraft speeding away from the scene. Inside the Poseidon, the tactical officer speaks into his headset with controlled urgency. Confirmed missile strike on commercial tanker. The report is sent across the U.S. naval network without delay. Warships in the region receive the alert within seconds, along with coordinates, attack details, and the aircraft's direction of travel. Because what just happened in the middle of the Persian Gulf was no accident, and the response is already in motion. At 5:16 a.m. local time, 4 minutes after the strike, the tanker is still burning. Flames now consume nearly a third of the deck. Thick black smoke rises straight into the morning sky, visible from more than 20 miles away. Inside the bridge, emergency lighting flickers through the damaged control room. Navigation systems are only partly functioning. One radar display is completely dead. Another struggles through heavy interference. Then one system finally activates. The emergency beacon, a loud tone, echoes through the bridge. The radio operator reaches for the distress microphone. Mayday, mayday, mayday. The call goes out across international maritime frequencies. This is a US-flagged oil tanker. We are under missile attack. Repeat, missile strike, vessel on fire, requesting immediate assistance. The message repeats again and again across the Gulf. Ships and aircraft monitoring emergency channels hear the same desperate transmission, but the closest help is already overhead. Above the burning ship, the U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon banks sharply and begins circling the disaster zone. From 20,000 feet, the crew has a clear view of the scene below. The tanker's deck has been torn open in 2 separate impact points. Fire is spreading along crude oil pipelines that run across the surface of the vessel. The flames are inching closer to the storage tanks. If those tanks ignite, the ship may not survive intact. Inside the Poseidon, the tactical stations come fully alive. Operators switch to infrared imaging. The screens flood with heat signatures. The fire is enormous. Temperatures across the cargo deck are rising fast. One sensor operator speaks quietly, but the meaning is unmistakable. The fire is moving toward the central tanks. That is the worst-case scenario. Beneath the deck sit thousands of tons of crude oil. If the heat reaches those compartments, the tanker could become a floating catastrophe. The Poseidon immediately transmits a full damage assessment. Live video is streamed straight to U.S. Naval Forces Central Command. Within seconds, American warships throughout the region receive the update. One vessel responds first, an Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer operating in the northern Gulf. Distance to the tanker, 38 nautical miles. The moment the message arrives, the order is given. All ahead flank. The destroyer's engines surge. Speed rises quickly. 20 knots, 25, 30. On the bridge, the officer of the deck studies the incoming feed from the Poseidon. Burning tanker, possible casualties, unknown threat picture. But the immediate priority is obvious: rescue. Meanwhile, overhead, the Poseidon continues searching the sky. Then another development appears. The radar operator leans forward. 2 fast-moving contacts, same direction as the original strike, leaving the area, climbing, speed extremely high. The Poseidon locks onto them at once. The camera zoom tightens, the shapes sharpen into view. 2 military jets, Iranian aircraft. They are already turning northeast, heading back toward their coastline. Inside the operations cabin, the mission commander watches the footage in silence. The strike aircraft show no signs of damage. No hesitation, no reduction in speed. They are simply departing the scene. Mission complete. But the Poseidon keeps tracking them. Every second matters now. Heading, speed, altitude. Everything is transmitted across the naval network in real time. Within minutes, another layer of response begins to form. Far to the south, aboard a U.S. aircraft carrier in the Arabian Sea, routine flight deck activity shifts instantly into combat readiness. 2 FA-18 Super Hornets are ordered airborne. Their objective is clear: intercept. Across the carrier deck, engines ignite. The fighters launch one after the other, climbing hard into the sky before turning toward the Gulf. But distance still matters. By the time the Super Hornets climb to operational altitude, the Iranian jets are already vanishing into the distance. Back near the burning tanker, the crisis keeps getting worse. On deck, crew members try to contain the fire with portable extinguishers and damaged foam cannons. It barely makes a difference. The flames keep feeding on spilled oil. Deep inside the engine room, temperatures are climbing into a dangerous range. Warning sensors begin flashing across multiple stations. The risk of further internal blasts is growing. On the shattered bridge, the tanker's captain stares out across the burning deck. The ship is still afloat, but only just. The fire is spreading steadily. If it reaches the central storage tanks, there may be nothing left to save. High above, the Poseidon continues its orbit in silence, recording the entire scene, sending live imagery to U.S. command centers, tracking the aircraft that carried out the strike, and watching a crippled tanker drift through the Persian Gulf. Help is on the way, but it is still miles out, and with every passing minute, the flames move closer to the fuel tanks. At 5:28 a.m. local time, the destroyer is closing fast. Only half an hour earlier, the sea had been calm. Now, from the bridge of the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the horizon is stained black with smoke. Sailors can already see it clearly, a massive oil tanker burning in the distance. Flames rise high above the deck, violent enough to stand out even from 15 miles away. The destroyer's radar tracks the drifting vessel, while the Combat Information Center studies the live feed coming from the Poseidon overhead. The damage is worse than first believed. 2 confirmed missile strikes, large fires moving across the cargo deck, casualties unknown, risk to the storage tanks increasing. Inside CIC, the tactical officer examines the infrared imagery frame by frame. The hottest zones are slowly creeping toward the center tanks. If the fire reaches them, the entire ship could be lost. The destroyer cannot let that happen. Launch the birds! Minutes later, the aft hangar doors swing open. 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters roll onto the flight deck. Their rotors begin turning immediately. Rescue swimmers wait by the open doors. Medical packs are secured, harnesses are locked. The mission is simple in theory and brutal in practice. Pull survivors off the tanker, slow the fire, and stop the ship from turning into a full-scale disaster. The first Seahawk lifts into the smoke-filled air. The second follows seconds later. Both accelerate toward the tanker. From above, the extent of the damage becomes even more disturbing. The port side is torn open near the waterline where the first missile struck. Burned steel bends outward like shredded metal. Farther off, the second impact point is still burning intensely. Fire races along the pipelines stretched across the deck. Heavy smoke surges upward in rolling black waves. The Seahawk pilots circle once over the ship as thermal cameras scan the deck. Dozens of heat signatures appear. Crew members are still on board. Some are still trying to fight the fire. Others are trapped near the stern. Then several figures jump into the water. 3 sailors hit the sea almost at once. Another follows moments later. The helicopter crew reacts without hesitation. Deploy swimmer. The rescue swimmer drops into the water below. Within seconds, he reaches the first survivor struggling in the waves. One by one, the sailors are clipped to the hoist and lifted into the helicopter. At the same time, the second Seahawk moves closer to the tanker itself. Emergency firefighting gear is lowered. Foam begins spreading across the forward section of the deck. White suppressant blankets parts of the flames and briefly slows their progress. But the fire is too large. It keeps pushing toward the cargo tanks. Back on the destroyer, additional firefighting systems are brought online. Long-range hoses begin throwing foam toward the tanker from hundreds of yards away. Every moment matters now. Inside the tanker's bridge, the captain sends one last report over the failing radio. 2 missile impacts confirmed, multiple crew injured, fire approaching storage tanks. Then, the transmission breaks off again. Across the ship, power systems continue to fail. And just as the rescue effort begins to gain traction, a fresh warning appears inside the destroyer's Combat Information Center. The radar operator speaks in a low, controlled voice. New contacts detected. Every eye turns to the display. 2 fast-moving objects, low altitude, approaching from the northeast. For a brief moment, the room goes completely still. Speed extremely high. Altitude below 500 feet. Flight pattern consistent with combat aircraft. The tactical officer recognizes the profile immediately. It matches the earlier strike run almost exactly. The destroyer's systems respond at once. Aegis radar locks onto the incoming tracks. Defensive weapons begin calculating intercept paths. Out on the flight deck, sailors look skyward as the Seahawk crews continue their rescue work over the burning tanker. Inside the destroyer, the captain studies the radar picture in silence. If those aircraft are coming back for a second pass, the tanker may not survive. And neither may the helicopters still hanging over it. The gap between the destroyer and the incoming aircraft is closing fast. 20 miles. 15. 10. Inside the Combat Information Center, every screen is fixed on the sky. What happens next will determine whether this remains a rescue operation or turns into open combat. The first sign that the crisis was no longer under control did not come from radar. It came from silence. For almost 11 minutes after the attack, the waters around the damaged tanker had stayed unnaturally still. No new aircraft appeared on scope. No additional launches were detected. The Iranian jets that carried out the strike had already disappeared beyond the southern horizon, their fading heat signatures swallowed by the haze over the Persian Gulf. But stillness at sea does not mean the danger has passed. At 7:23 a.m. local time, the U.S. tanker's emergency beacon activates automatically. The signal is brief, compressed, and unmistakable. Distress, missile strike, vessel disabled. Fire spreading midship. Within seconds, maritime satellites thousands of miles above the Earth pick up the alert. It is routed into the global maritime safety network and pushed across multiple command centers almost instantly. But the most important listener is already on the net. roughly 200 nautical miles away inside a U.S. Navy operations center monitoring commercial traffic near the Strait of Hormuz. The alert flashes across several tactical displays at once. A single red symbol appears on screen. U.S. flag tanker. Confirmed strike. The room falls silent. Nobody has to say what everyone is already thinking. This is not piracy. This is not a navigational disaster. This is a deliberate attack on an American commercial vessel. And the response chain is already underway. At 7:26, requests for confirmation go out to nearby ships. Merchant vessels in the area begin reporting what they saw only minutes earlier. 2 fast-moving fighter aircraft, low altitude, missile trails, then impact. Every account matches. The targeting was intentional, precise, controlled. Inside the operations center, analysts begin rebuilding the sequence of events using satellite tracking, commercial radar feeds, and maritime traffic data. The pattern becomes clear almost immediately. 2 aircraft approached from the Iranian coastline, flying low enough to stay beneath most civilian radar coverage. They closed on the target in less than 5 minutes. Launch, impact, exit. Total time over the area, under 3 minutes. A textbook hit. But the real consequences are only starting to unfold. Back on the tanker, conditions are worsening fast. The fire ignited by the first impact has now reached the vessel's secondary fuel lines. Thick black smoke pours upward, visible for miles across the Gulf. The crew has managed to shut down the main engines, preventing a propulsion disaster, but the ship is now drifting with the current, its massive hull rolling slightly in open water. On the bridge, the captain faces an impossible choice: stay aboard and keep fighting the fire, or abandon ship before the heat reaches the cargo tanks. Neither option feels safe. Even if the flames can be slowed, the hull has already been badly damaged. If another blast erupts below deck, the ship could break apart within minutes. At 7:31, the order is finally given: prepare lifeboats. But even that decision comes with serious danger. Launching lifeboats from a burning tanker in open water leaves almost no room for error. If the vessel tilts too far, or if another explosion hits during evacuation, the boats could be lost before they ever touch the water. Still, waiting is worse. The crew moves fast, but with discipline. Emergency rafts are lowered along the starboard side, while other sailors continue blasting foam across the burning midship section. Above them, the smoke column rises nearly 3,000 feet into the sky. From orbit, it looks like a dark wound across the ocean, and that mark is now being followed by satellites, drones, and naval patrol aircraft across the entire region. At 7:34, another signal reaches the operations center. The next signal did not come from the tanker. It came from the sky. A long-range maritime patrol aircraft operating in the region had picked up something new on radar. 2 high-speed contacts were moving north, back toward the Iranian coastline. The aircraft kept its distance, but its sensors locked onto them immediately. Speed, altitude, course. Within seconds, the data confirmed what analysts had already begun to suspect. The aircraft that carried out the strike were heading home. But what they left behind was far more serious than a damaged ship burning at sea. Their action had set off a chain of events reaching far beyond the tanker itself. The moment a U.S. vessel is hit in international waters, the situation stops being only a maritime emergency. It becomes something much larger. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the first American naval assets were already moving, quietly, quickly, and with a precision the pilots likely had not expected. The strike on the tanker was over. The consequences were only beginning. By 7:41 a.m. local time, the burning tanker was no longer the only focus in the Persian Gulf. Multiple surveillance systems had already locked onto the area. Commercial satellites, regional radar stations, U.S. maritime patrol aircraft. Within minutes, the entire sequence had been rebuilt almost frame by frame. Launch signatures, aircraft routes, the exact moment the tanker's hull was hit. Every detail was now under live analysis. But the most important shift was happening beyond the visible horizon. At 7:45, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon arrived over the area at high altitude. It did not descend right away. Instead, it settled into a broad orbit above the damaged vessel, its radar sweeping across hundreds of miles of sea and airspace. The Poseidon could see everything: drifting lifeboats, small vessels moving toward the area, even aircraft operating near the Iranian coastline. Below, the crisis aboard the tanker had entered its most delicate stage. The fire was still burning near midship, but the crew had managed to slow its spread using foam suppression systems. Flames that had earlier climbed high into the air were now confined to a smaller section of the deck. Still dangerous, still unstable, but no longer completely out of control. At 7:48, the first lifeboat touched the water. One by one, crew members evacuated from the starboard side, lowering themselves into the Gulf while thick smoke continued rising above the ship. Around the tanker, the surface of the sea had begun to change, a thin layer of fuel slowly spreading across the water. Even so, the evacuation remained orderly. There was no panic, no frantic rush. Only the steady discipline of a trained crew carrying out procedures built for the worst kind of day. From above, the P-8 recorded every moment, not just the evacuation itself, but the larger picture taking shape around it. Because while the tanker still burned, the wider response was already underway. At 7:52, two more aircraft appeared on the Poseidon's radar, fast, high altitude, approaching from the south. They were not Iranian fighters, they were U.S. Navy F/A-18 Super Hornets, launched from a carrier strike group operating hundreds of miles away. Within minutes, the fighters established a combat air patrol over the damaged tanker, forming a protective shield across the surrounding airspace. Their mission was simple: make sure no second strike could happen. The jets began flying broad circles over the Gulf, scanning for any aircraft that might try to return. Their radars reached deep across the horizon, watching the same approach routes used earlier. Nothing appeared. The sky remained empty. But the arrival of those fighters changed everything. The Gulf was no longer just a commercial shipping route dealing with a maritime emergency. It had become an active operational zone under U.S. military cover. At 8:06, the final lifeboat cleared the tanker, all crew accounted for. The tanker itself was still on fire. The missile strike had ripped a devastating gap through the vessel's midsection, and despite everything the crew had done, the structural damage was severe. Now the ship was drifting with the Gulf currents, trailing black smoke into the brightening sky. And yet, the disaster had stopped just short of its worst possible ending. The cargo tanks had not ignited, the hull had not split apart, and most importantly, every crew member had made it out alive. By 8:17 a.m., the first official incident reports were already moving through global shipping networks. The message was brief and direct. Missile strike confirmed. U.S. flag tanker damaged. Crew evacuated. Situation stabilized. Within hours, the incident would dominate maritime intelligence briefings, military analysis rooms, and international news coverage. But out on the water, the moment felt very different. Quieter. The fighters continued their patrol high above the Gulf. The Poseidon remained in its orbit. Rescue vessels moved carefully toward the lifeboats, and the burning tanker drifted slowly with the current, its column of smoke rising high into the morning sky like a signal that could be seen for hundreds of miles. A warning, because in waters like the Persian Gulf, no action stays isolated for long. A single strike can send shockwaves through shipping routes, naval patrol patterns, and global energy markets within minutes. And sometimes the most important part of the story is not the damage that happens. It is the larger disaster that never arrives. That morning, a $200 million American oil tanker had taken a direct hit. The ship was badly damaged. The water around it burned. The tension across the region surged in an instant, but the line between crisis and catastrophe held, only just.